Warning: the following content may be disturbing to some individuals. Consumer discretion is advised.
Do you hear it? The siren song luring you into the realm of folklore and myth. Haint and the undead, weird creatures and evil itself. If you come along for the ride, will you make it back? Let's go, ghouls!
Hey, this is Rhonda, and welcome to episode 2 of Sirens of the Supernatural. Happy Friday 13th.
And this is Lindsay from Sirens of the Supernatural, and we're going to talk to you guys today a little bit about Friday the 13th. And is it lucky? Is it unlucky? Why do some people think 13 is good? Why do some people think it's bad? So here's what I found when I was doing my research, because I never really even thought about Friday the 13th. It's unlucky, and we're going with that. But here's what I found. So refinery29.com, William Fowler was a man in the 19th century, and he was very superstitious guy. He was obsessed with the number 13. And there was a lot of times when 13 kind of coincided with his life. For example, he attended PS 13. He fought in 13 battles during the Civil War. He built 13 structures in New York City, and he belonged to 13 secret clubs. And any major event in his life that he had coming up, he would try to schedule parties, whatever, around the 13th. So this guy founded the 13 Club, and it was founded on Friday the 13th at 8:13 in room 13 of Knickerbocker Cottage. Now, this was an event, okay? This event included a 13-course meal, and It was eaten below a banner stating Morituri te salutamus, which means, "We who are about to die salute you." So based on that, I'm not sure if he didn't like 13, if he thought it was unlucky, or if he thought it was lucky, because that banner kind of tells me he's a little nervous about it. But so he regularly scheduled these supper clubs until his death in 1897, when the club was dismantled, but his legacy of Friday the 13th lived on. And then I got to thinking, okay, well, that was just the 19th century, so let's back it up a little bit more. So in Norse mythology, Loki, who's the god of mischief, who we're probably all familiar with by now with Marvel and the Avengers and all that good stuff, he crashes a banquet in Valhalla. He brings the number of guests to that banquet to 13. So there was 12, but he shows up and now there's 13. The blind god Hodder was deceived by Loki and ends up shooting his brother Balder with an arrow and killing him. Now, Balder was the god of light, joy, goodness, all this good stuff. And now he's dead because Loki showed up to this dinner as guest number 13. Okay? But so it all kind of comes down to some cultural stuff. So is it lucky or unlucky? And that kind of comes down a little bit to Christianity versus paganism. So in pagan times, Friday was associated with the divine feminine. So Friday's derived from Old English, meaning day of Frigg. Now, Frigg was the queen of Asgard. She was a powerful sky goddess associated with love, marriage, motherhood, protected homes and families, maintained social order. She could weave fate, possess the art of prophecy. She could grant or take fertility. So she was doing it all, okay? But sometimes she was confused or kind of merged with Freya, who was the goddess of love, fertility, and war, oddly enough. love and war right there. But she was really cool because she could kind of do the same thing. She could perform magic, predict the future, determine who died in battles. But interestingly enough, she was said to ride a chariot that was pulled by 2 black cats, which are also another Friday the 13th kind of associated superstition. And I'll talk more about black cats later on. But so 13, according to the pagan culture, is linked to the number of lunar and menstrual cycles that occur in a year, and it was prized in pagan times because of fertility and its importance to the culture. And it was also depicted in art, which, of course, I'm going to bring some art in here. Venus of Lawsol is a 25,000-year-old carved limestone figure. It shows a very voluptuous female figure cradling her pregnant stomach and holding a crescent-shaped horn bearing 13 notches. This was believed to represent fertility and menstrual cycles, which were all very highly prized things to the pagans. But then you have Christianity, which is blossoming and growing and becoming this bigger religion. So if they're trying to persuade more people to come over to their religion, they're going to look at what the pagans are doing with the number 13. And they're, of course, going to say, no, it's unlucky. I don't think you should be down with number 13. I think you should think it's unlucky like us. And of course, anybody that worshipped any of those deities or goddesses, they're automatically going to be deemed as pagans and scary and witches, when in reality, it's not really that scary. They just really, 13 was their thing. They just liked it. So that's what I found as far as, is it lucky? Is it unlucky? I think it just comes down to cultural aspects.
Thanks for that, Lindsay. I didn't know a lot of those things about the number 13 and the origins. When I did my research, I was looking more into the Christian beliefs about Friday the 13th, and I found that some trace the unluckiness of that number to Jesus's Last Supper with his disciples. And we all know that was on a Thursday. And the last and 13th guest who arrived was Judas Iscariot, who betrayed Jesus. And that led to Jesus's crucifixion on the next day, which was a Friday. And that's also why some people think you should never have 13 guests around the table, which is quite different. That's a quite different perspective than what Lindsay shared in her pagan research.
But also kind of interesting because that kind of ties in with, here comes Loki, he's the 13th guest, and then Balder was the god of everything light and good, and now he's dead. So that's kind of interesting.
That is. I didn't even think about that. And you mentioned the word frig, where the number 13 came from. And I guess that's where we get the word for the fear of the number 13. It's actually a real thing. It's called frigatriskaidekaphobia. And that's a long word to say. Some people shorten it to just triskaidekaphobia, but I think that's the way you say it. If not, forgive me. I also found in my research there is a research center called the Stress Management Center and Phobia Institute. And their website said that so many people across the globe think that Friday the 13th is unlucky that every time a Friday 13th happens, the world's economy loses about $900 million because people are afraid to travel. They stay home from work. And so I thought that was interesting. And then I've even been in hotels that don't have a 13th floor. They'll go 12A, 12B, 14. So whatever its origins or whatever you may believe, Friday 13th superstitions are still very much around today.
Okay, so we're going to dive into some other superstitions too, not just Friday the 13th. So people who came from Europe and settled in the Appalachian Mountains brought their superstitions with them. Many of those had to do with death.
And one of those that had to do with death was, and I've heard this many times growing up in the mountains, they believed that death comes in threes. So, in other words, if someone they knew passed away, The older folks would say it wouldn't be long before 2 more people would die in the congregation or community. And in my own experience, that did happen more than once. They also had a weird thing about owls. They thought that owls were omens of death, so they got a bad rap. If an owl was seen looking into a window, it supposedly foretold an early death for someone in the house. Hearing a screech owl at dusk also was supposed to mean someone would die. If an owl suddenly appeared at the home of someone ill, they sometimes said that death would follow within 2 days for that person that was ill. And if a bat or a wild bird flew into the house, that was also supposed to be the sign of a coming death. Interesting.
That's a lot of owl talk. Like that's a lot of superstitions to do with owls.
It really is.
Okay, and here's some other ones just based from Appalachian tradition. And these are coming from AppalachianFreePress.com and AppalachianHistory.net. So when someone dies in a home, it's customary to open a door or window to help that soul find its way out. And this is based in Danish tradition, as well as Christianity and paganism in the root. So I guess those traditions came over from wherever those people were coming from. Mountain people believed that sometimes a strong wind would even come and blow and escort the soul out and just help it on its journey and wherever it was going from there. I also found a lot of interesting stuff about covering mirrors after death, which I never really heard a lot about, but this is from joincake.com. And there are different cultures with this too that do different things. So an Irish wake, and usually a wake is when the body's laid out in the home, people sit up with it for a specific amount of time, but an Irish wake, so the family covers all mirrors or they flip them to face the wall. And this hides the physical body from the soul. So I guess if the soul's out of the body, it's roaming the house. If it were to see the physical body through the mirror, it could try to go into the mirror and then get trapped. So Irish superstition, what were you going to say?
I just said, that's interesting.
Irish superstition says that if you look in the mirror long enough, you'll see the devil peeking over your shoulder, which kind of reminds me of Bloody Mary, which of course everybody's played that game before, or like peed their pants about to play that game. And that mirrors also trap the soul, so I guess that's why they were covered. Polish Catholics cover mirrors on All Saints' Day when spirits can pass through mirrors because the veil is thinner. But here's what I don't understand with that, okay? So I'm wondering what they're covering the mirror with, because if the soul can travel through the glass of the mirror, the fabric's still holding it back. I don't get that, but I mean, you gotta respect. So because the veil is thinner, they're covering all the mirrors up. And then Jewish custom is sitting the Shiva, which is a week-long mourning period, and they cover all mirrors and reflective surfaces, so any reflective surface at all. Now, this is to encourage inner stillness and to meditate on the deceased, which I think is a very genuine and heartfelt tradition, because then you're really reflecting on who that person was in your life and all the memories of you. So I think that one's really cool. But I want to end off on, most notably, all the mirrors in the White House were draped with black fabric after Abe Lincoln died, because Mary Todd Lincoln was a huge spiritualist. So she was doing all the seances. She was trying to contact her son that passed away and Abe Lincoln after he passed away. So that makes sense, but I'm sure looked very, very creepy at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. Wow. And you mentioned wake, as far as an Irish wake in Appalachia. And I remember even when my grandfather passed away, they had the body and in the casket laid out in the living room, and people came to the house and stayed up all night with the body. Those traditions, a lot of them came over from Ireland and Scotland and places where they would, someone would sit up all night with the deceased. So I remember that. I remember thinking, it was a little creepy, but it was just what they did. And then some other ones I heard from my maternal grandmother was if a clock that had long been motionless suddenly started ticking or striking the hour, it was a sign of approaching death. So if they had a grandfather clock that wasn't working and hadn't worked for a year or two, and all of a sudden it started working again, they would become very fearful that someone was going to pass.
What that reminds me of?
What?
And I wonder if they thought about this when they were Stranger Things, the most recent season. Do you remember when the grandfather clock would start tolling?
Yes.
Right Vecna would attack everyone. I wonder if they thought about that at all, or if that's just like purely coincidental.
I don't know, but that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
That's wild.
That is wild. And oddly enough, some people in the community, older people in the community, had the ability to they would predict things with their dreams. My grandmother would dream of blackbirds, and every time she dreamed of a blackbird, someone in their little mountain community would pass within 3 days to a week. Numerous times that happened, and I just was in awe of that, and it creeped me out some too.
Yeah.
And they had birth superstitions as well as death superstitions. Scottish midwives would give a pinch of ash to a newborn while nursing for the first time, because that supposedly provided the babies with lifelong protection against witches. And we all know they believed in witches and things like that. And some Irish and other European immigrants even spit on their babies to bring good luck. I'm glad that wasn't a thing when I was born. If a baby was born with a veil, which meant that the amniotic sac was intact around the baby, or part of the sac was covering its face, they believed that child would have the gift of prophecy or foresight and be destined for just something great. And they also had a way of predicting whether your child will be a girl or a boy before, the technology of ultrasound and all of that. They would get a ring or a needle, and they would thread it, and they would hold it above the belly of the mother-to-be. And if the ring or the needle swayed side to side, it meant it was a boy, but if it went in a circle, it was a girl. And when I was pregnant with my second child, your sister Courtney, they did that. My great aunt and my grandma did that and predicted that she would be a girl, and we hadn't found out yet. But when we found out, that's what they told us we were having. So that was kind of neat.
It's crazy.
Yeah. One other thing that I remember in the community was if a baby got thrush, there was a person in the community that they would call and have this person come to the house, and they would lay the baby out on a table or a bed, and this person would blow into the child's face, and the thrush would disappear within a day or two. And I don't know how that works, but they really believed in that. I think some of these mountain people maybe knew some things doctors don't know, because they had a lot of remedies for sicknesses and things that actually worked. So take it away.
That's crazy. That I don't blowing in a baby's face, that
I know.
That makes me so uncomfortable. I don't know. Like, their immune system's already so fragile, and then you're gonna have some old person come breathe on them.
No. I know.
Wild.
It is wild.
But speaking of Friday the 13th and good luck and bad luck, there's also a lot of other superstitions that have to do with both of those. So for good luck, when an eyelash falls out, we've probably all heard this one. When your eyelash falls out, if you can catch it, you pinch it lightly between your thumb and your forefinger, and then you have to make a wish. And then you open your fingers, and if it sticks, your wish will come true. But if it falls off, I've always heard that, try again. Your wish ain't coming true. If you rub the head of a person with red hair, it's supposed to be good luck, which is weird, but okay. Obviously, finding a penny, we all know that one. But I never knew, is it laying on heads or tails? Which one are you supposed to pick up for good luck?
I think it's heads. Yeah, heads for good luck.
I wonder if you pick up tails if it's bad luck. Okay. Also, if you see a white horse, it's good luck. And if you have horseshoes or rabbit's feet or four-leaf clovers, those are good luck items too. Now, I have a friend who can find a four-leaf clover in probably less than 5 minutes of being pretty much anywhere. On her wedding day, her and her husband were just off kind of by themselves, went and just found 2 four-leaf clovers, just casually. Like, she can find a four-leaf clover like nobody's business, which is wild. But I did want to talk about some black cats. I love black cats. So obviously a lot of people think black cats are unlucky, and if they cross in front of you, you're cursed. But I do not think that that's the case. And let me tell you why. So we're going to take it all the way back to ancient Egypt, which of course we know they loved cats. They believed cats were divine. As a matter of fact, black cats actually resembled their goddess Bastet, who was also a cat goddess, so they were honored and worshipped. And then in Greek mythology, Hecate, who is the goddess of magic, was described as having a cat as both a pet and a familiar. Now, a familiar is an animal that assists a witch, just according to folklore. They can transform into that animal, or they can have them go run errands, get them things, all that good stuff. But in 1233, Pope Gregory IX, now I don't know what was wrong with this guy, but he declared cats were an incarnation of Satan.
What?
What happened to him? Is he what cat hurt him? I could find no reason why. They're from Satan. So yeah, cats also became linked to witches in medieval Europe, which I think it's because witches honor the natural world, which includes animals. So obviously, if they see a cat, they're going to leave food out for it. And if it stays, and they're going to take care of it, because that's their thing. They're going to honor the natural world. But cats can also help a lot with mice, and they're fairly independent, which is also good, especially if, back in those times, you're probably just worried about yourself and nothing else. So if you had a cat, great, but you're going to have to take care of yourself at this point. So let's think about this for a second. Why take a turn? Who do we know that might have problems with independent women and also independent animals? If you're thinking the church, you're probably right. As we know, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but a lot of times in the Christian church, they're not for women holding positions of power or having big opinions. So they might have seen that as independent woman, independent cat. That's double the trouble. They gotta go. They gotta go. They gotta go somewhere else. So then in the Middle Ages, people started blaming cats for the bubonic plague, the Black Death. And they started killing them in droves. Ironically, this helped fuel the plague because as the number of cats went down, the number of mice and fleas went up. And we know that was the real killer. So the disease spread more rapidly. So they were wrong on that one. They were wrong that black cats are unlucky because they're cute. So some believed that the devil and witches were able to take the form of their familiars or black cats. And that a black cat crossing your path might be on a mission from a witch, coming to do you harm, or even the devil in disguise. This unfortunate superstition has persisted even today, with most people not even knowing why they think black cats are unlucky. They just are. Because of this, black cats have the highest rate of euthanasia and lowest adoption rate, and that comes straight from the National Institute of Health.
Wow.
And that's solely because of this superstition. That's what it's from. Which sucks because every black cat that I've ever come into contact with has been the cutest little cuddle bug. They're the best little spooky pet you can have. So that's kind of heartbreaking that because of this, they're missing out on a good home.
Yeah. Oh, that's sad.
Not sad.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, some other things that are supposed to be bad luck are walking under a ladder. We've all heard that one. Breaking a mirror is supposed to result in 7 years of bad luck. Another thing that we kind of practice in the mountain is if your ear is itching or burning, that's supposed to mean someone's talking about you right at that moment. That's one of their superstitions. If you have an itching foot, it's a sign that you're about to go on a long journey. If your nose is itching, that means company's coming, so you better get the house straightened up. And another one, if you spill salt, you're supposed to throw a pinch of it over your left shoulder to keep bad luck away. I'm not sure why, but I still see people doing that back home too.
Oh, I do it every
you
time.
Do it every time?
Every time.
I wonder, it'd be neat to hear some of the superstitions that our listeners have heard of or that have been passed down in their own families. So if you're out there listening, email us and let us know. We'd love to hear about your superstition.
Yeah, send them in. So what are your thoughts? Are you superstitious? Do you believe in, is Friday the 13th lucky or unlucky? What are we thinking?
I just think it's a day like any other. I think pretty much you make your own luck. I don't really believe that if I find a penny on the ground, I'm going to have good luck because of it. Or if I break a mirror, I'm going to have bad luck. I mean, I have broken some mirrors, let me tell you. But I just think, those are kind of things of the past. And for me, they don't hold a lot of truth. Not dissing anybody else's beliefs or superstitions, of course, but for me personally, what do you believe?
Well, as Michael Scott said, I'm not superstitious, but I am malicious. So I don't believe cats are unlucky, but if I'm spilling salt, I'm throwing it over my left shoulder. And I will not walk under a ladder. I won't do it.
You won't?
Even though it's opportune for me because I'm so short, so I could, but I'm not going to do it. I'm just not. It's not happening.
Don't take any chances.
Yeah, I'm not taking any chances. But Friday the 13th, I feel like nothing bad has ever happened to me. I know there's probably a lot of crazy stories about bad things happening, but I feel like you kind of see what you look for.
That's true. Yeah. Bad things happen on any day of the year, not just Friday 13th.
Yeah, it could be any day.
Exactly. Well, we're going to switch gears in next week's episode and discuss Appalachia's weird creatures and cryptids, including one called the wood booger. So I know you can't wait for that. That's going to be an interesting one.
And remember, we want your spooky stories. So email them to sirensofthesupernatural@gmail.com and check out our Sirens of the Supernatural on YouTube and Facebook. We're at Sirens of the Supernatural on Instagram and at Supernatural Sirens on TikTok.
And speaking of listener stories, after a short break, Ryan will be back with our very first listener story. We appreciate all those listener stories that are coming in. Keep sending them. And stay tuned and stay spooky.
Stay spooky. Stay tuned for more Sirens of the Supernatural.
I'm Rhonda with Sirens of the Supernatural, and we're inviting you to tune in to our very special Halloween episode. Our team will be doing some on-site investigating at a nearly 200-year-old building where ghosts have shown themselves through the decades and still are.
Hey, this is Lindsay. I do Sunday Scaries, and for the days leading up to our investigation, I'll be tuning in and telling you guys a few of the scary stories of the different ghosts that supposedly haunt the Martha Washington, including a riderless horse that haunts the grounds, and Beth, a nurse who tried to get her union lover back to health, but unfortunately, it took a tragic turn. So tune in to our very exciting episode. Welcome back to Sirens of the Supernatural.
And it wouldn't be an episode of Sirens of the Supernatural without a scary story. And here's Ryan to share one with you. It's called The Haint of Red House Hill. Take it away, Ryan.
Okay, and thank you, Rhonda. And this is a story that has been sent in by one of our listeners and viewers. Great responses, great interaction so far. And this is very special because it's actually from the area where we was raised at. The Appalachian Mountains, some call it the Black Mountains of Virginia because it's coal mining country. The hollers are super deep. You can yell and nobody else can hear you unless you're at the top of that particular mountain. The woods are thick. You can be walking, 10 foot and somebody can't even see you in front of them. At nighttime, if the moon's not shining and you're not in open field, nobody's going to see you. It's a great place where you can go disappear. You can just go enjoy yourself and get away from all the hustle and bustle of the world. And this is a story from one of our fellow Sirens out there. It's one of our listeners, and we love you guys' feedback. And this is a really good story we want to share with you guys. And this is the story as told in his words. So, we're going to try to do it justice. And here we go. This is a story about an incident that happened to my grandfather back in the 1930s. And it's been passed down from generation ever since. But before I tell the story, I'll assure you that I'm a skeptic and I personally do not believe in the supernatural. Now, with that being said, anyone who knew my grandfather would tell you that he was one of the finest and most trustworthy men who ever lived. I never recall him telling a lie, saying a negative word about anyone, or even so much as using profanity. While I'm not necessarily saying that I believe the story that I'm about to tell you, there's no question in my mind that my grandfather believed it. Back in the 1930s, very few people in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia had electricity or cars, so nearly everyone traveled by the way of horseback or horse-drawn wagons. Most folks did their traveling during the daytime, but those who found themselves out after dark had to rely on their vision, and if they were lucky enough to travel a clear night, the light of the moon. At the time, my grandparents' home was located on a narrow, winding dirt road that led from the highway, or what passed as a highway back then, several miles to the river. Running water and indoor plumbing were luxuries most people didn't have. So those who lived in the area had to make their way several miles down the spooky, twisting road to collect water from the river. The road above the creek, and many sections of the road have earned sinister names such as Dead Man's Curve, where back in the 1920s a drunk fella who was walking home strayed too close to the edge of the curve and fell down the cliff into a particularly deep section of the creek. He was knocked unconscious when he fell and therefore drowned in the icy water. Without question, however, the most spooky and creepy part of the road passes through an area called Red House Hill. Supposedly there was a house painted red at the top of the hill where something terrible happened once. What the house looked like, who lived there, or what terrible event that occurred there has since been long lost to time, yet the title remains. Back in the 1930s, rumors started going around that something was haunting the woods around Red House Hill. This thing, or Haint, as the locals always called it, only appeared at night and spooked horses so they wouldn't go any further up Red House Hill. Dogs were said to whine and howl in fear and react as if they could see something that was otherwise invisible. Fear of the Haint forced people to avoid Red House Hill, which doubled the time and distance it took them to get to the river. My grandfather, or Papa Clyde as we call him, was a skeptic, much like me, so he didn't pay mind to Haint stories. One particular night, though, Papa Clyde was coming home from the river on his horse, Old Tom. Now, Old Tom was the gentlest, most well-trained horse in the countryside, and he always obeyed his rider's commands without hesitation. Hey-ya! Darkness had long since fallen, but the moon was so full that Papa could clearly see his road in front of him. To his left, the road dropped down to a cliff, and on his right was a steep bank edged by thick woods. As Papa and Old Tom started up Red House Hill, he could hear the sound of something moving through the woods above the road. He paid it no mind, thinking it was just a deer. Old Tom started to hesitate and didn't want to continue up the hill. Papa urged him on, and Old Tom reluctantly kept walking. After several more steps, though, Papa suddenly felt something jump on Old Tom's back right behind him. The horse immediately slowed his steps, reacting as if something carrying a huge weight and several hundred pounds had been added to his back. Papa could feel something breathing on the back of his neck, and he smelled a combination of wet dog and the putrid scent of decay. Papa immediately looked behind him. There was nothing there. Whatever the thing or Haint was, it was invisible, yet he could still hear it breathing, feel its hot breath, and smell its stench. Suddenly, it felt as if the Haint jumped off Old Tom's back and made its way back up the bank and into the woods. 90 years later, the old folks still talk in hushed whispers about the Haint of Red House Hill. What was it? A demonic entity? The ghost of the man who drowned in Dead Man's Curve? A Native American skinwalker? No one really knows, or what haunts Red House Hill, or if it's still out there somewhere. But someone will agree on one thing: never, ever travel up Red House Hill at night. That thing might still be waiting. Thank you for that story. I love that when my fellow sirens out in the hollers and deep woods, wherever that may be, you may even have some of you city folks who want to tell us a couple of things from back in the day when you was growing up. But we appreciate that. If you guys have any extra stories to send us, you can send it to sirensofthesupernatural@gmail.com. We'd love to hear more from you. And this one was sent in anonymously, so thank you for whoever you are out there. Keep it safe out there. You know, I'll be seeing you in the holler somewhere soon. So thank you again, and back at you, Rhonda.
Thanks, Ryan. Y'all keep those stories coming, and don't miss next Friday's episode, Appalachia's Cryptids and Weird Creatures, plus a story that's near and dear to my heart, the Backwoods Boogeyman. That's a wrap. Y'all stay spooky.